Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we assemble to explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, 1 minute at a time. In this, our 6th season, we are looking at the Avengers. I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
And I'm Pete Wright. And is it wrong that I love this minute so much?
It is, actually. Today we're talking about minute 48, which begins with Thor warning Loki to listen well and ends with Iron Man blasting Thor in the chest. Back on the show one last time this season, we have Nathan Blackwell and Krissy Lenz from the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast. Hello, you two.
Hey.
Hello. I also love this minute a little too much.
Thank you, Krissy. Thank you.
Yay.
Yeah, this is where we get into all this nonsense. All right. Anyway. Before we do, we get Loki and Thor. This is the end of their conversation. The two of them, Loki reveals he doesn't have the cube. I sent it off, I know not where. This whole idea that the cube is gone at this point, I guess to a certain extent. I mean, how do you all see this? If Loki... Just say, for example, that Thor did have a way to get back to Asgard without the Tesseract, and he actually grabbed Loki and just took him off to Asgard right here. Do Eric and Clint have everything? Well, first, would the Mind Stone suddenly stop working, or does it work across the galaxy? I guess is an important question. But two, if he did leave and they were still under his control, would they still be able to kind of complete everything, and would they just kind of go through with it? I mean, I feel like they have everything they need at this point, right?
Yeah, it's got to work across the whole galaxy because once Thanos does the snap, it goes across all the galaxies, right? So it's got to have a nice wide reach. I mean...
Yeah,
true.
I don't think it has like as limited a range as a Wi-Fi booster.
I'd love he gets back to Asgard. It's just like, where's the closest Wi-Fi? I gotta make sure my connection's still good.
Yep.
I don't know. Nathan, Pete?
Good. Yeah, I agree. I concur. It's being of the Mind Stone. It's got to have plenty of range.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with it. But I'm on board with everything about this minute.
Yay.
I feel awful.
I feel like if he was able to summon the Bifrost and zap Loki over, he'd do that, but then I'm sure he feels like he'd do that for a good solid, 2 hours and then come back, because he does have that nagging feeling like, okay, the Tesseract is still loose, it's still my responsibility Midgard.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be in on this. So I feel like he would zap off. He'd commute back and forth if he had the option.
Right.
Now, but here's another question, though. Why do Tony, the Avengers, we'll just call it kind of the team, why do they feel they need to have Loki here to find it if they already have Bruce working on this gamma tool to track it down so they can find it by its readings from its gamma signature?
I think they're just trying to follow up on any lead they got at this point. I think they're on their back foot trying to get whatever they can to kind of understand the big picture. Okay,
but I mean, Iron Man will say here as soon as he shows up that, as soon as he gives us the Tesseract, you can take him home. Mm-hmm. He makes it feel like they have to have Loki in order to get the Tesseract. And I just don't think that's it hasn't been the case from the start.
Did it feel a little bit like maybe they were thinking there would be some kind of maybe hostage trade-off or something? Because he says in the 2 minutes previous, 2 or 3 minutes previous, if he kills Loki or frees him, the Tesseract is lost. Yeah, and it's why?
Yeah, I don't get that.
I don't understand why. I think I'm on Team Nathan, but maybe Nathan isn't on Team Pete. I see it as that
we're our own little Avengers team. None of us agree.
I
need a Team Nathan shirt.
That we have the people on the helicarrier are putting their sciencing a solution, and Tony is brute forcing a solution. And the one thing they do know is that Loki walked off with the Tesseract, and Tony doesn't know that that Loki sent it off I know not where. All he
Which
knows,
could even be a lie.
yeah, right. It could be a lie. So all he knows is that this is yet another vector to approach finding the Tesseract. So,
Right.
is it, I don't understand why that, to me, that just reads as totally normal.
Yeah, I'm on Team Pete.
Okay, well, I guess part of it boils down to, and this may be where there is some gray area, because Tony clearly kind of taps into whatever information he wants to, and likely has an understanding from S.H.I.E.L.D. as to what they're working on. And so when he does say that line earlier about the fact that if they send that off, then if we don't get that from him, the Tesseract is lost to us.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it sound like he has no clue. So maybe he really isn't. I don't know. I guess I just always assume Iron Man is kind of tapped into everything, but maybe he really isn't. And maybe he doesn't know that Bruce is working on anything.
That's where I come. I think he is just not. I think this is a situation where at this point in the movie, not everybody is on the same page at this point.
Mm-hmm. And
right.
This is also like a really sensitive place for Tony, because he was the first to kind of raise the idea of, he was there to kind of like, well, what if there are more super beings around there? What if it's like, eventually towards the end of the movie, spoiler alert, like he's the one who is like, I've got to make a sacrifice to save Earth. He's the one who wants to put an armor around the world. Like this is his sensitive spot. Like Earth could be invaded and it's going to be up to me. It's going to be up to me and a bunch of these, weirdos. Yeah, exactly. Like these half measures, like these people who it's like he's trying to see the long game.
Yeah.
And so this is definitely putting this and later with Infinity War with Thanos, like this is his worst case scenario.
I think there's also something to be said too of like Tony says it himself in his own best words is like, don't take my stuff.
Yeah.
I had Loki. You don't get to just come take him. Like, I don't care if you're, Asgardian or his brother. Like, don't take my stuff.
Yeah.
He wants to be the guy in charge of the prisoner interrogations.
That's certainly the case. Well, let's stop beating around the bush. I mean, Iron Man shows up very shortly after this exchange between Loki and Thor. And, Pete, is this, in your referencing Tig Notaro moment, is this the moment when Thor has a line, Iron Man interrupts, Loki delivers his quippy follow-up?
Yes, Andy. Yes, this is the line. This is so classic. And this is where I think, in terms of Notaro's prowess as a filmmaker, is to move from something very serious to something that you might as well find in a Three Stooges film quite deftly. Like this is something that feels like such a natural swing in his cinematic voice that I think I can't ignore that. Like it's really good and funny and makes me laugh. And I actually think the cheap follow-up line, I'm listening, is it's icing on the cake of stupid physical humor, like special effects humor. I absolutely don't mind it. I am in the bag for this kind of, shenaniganry.
Yeah.
Agree.
Andy?
I feel like I'm going to be the one on the island. And, that's fine. I mean, I really end up, I get it. There is this big trope. We've already talked about this a little bit. This idea of this comic book trope about heroes fighting and going through their whole thing before they get to a point that they figure out how to work together. I just end up really struggling with it. And sometimes I just don't buy that they just don't have a conversation. It just feels like so over the top for them to go to such lengths as we're going to see over the following scene between the three of them by the time Captain America shows up, that it takes this long for them to settle down. And I guess there's a lot to just the behavior of men in these types of situations to a certain extent. But sometimes I just find that it just is, it's a little much. And when I watch this, I end up rolling my eyes a lot through this whole thing.
And I don't want to I don't want to dissuade from that perspective. I roll my eyes too. I just laughing at the same time. Right?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
it's stuff that is like superficially good humor and coming on a very heavy, when he says Shakespeare in the Park, like that is the perfect quip for this because that was an extraordinarily heavy Shakespearean moment. And he's, and Whedon's here poking fun at something so serious in the voice of Tony that, actually is kind of self-referential. Like, I acknowledge what we're doing here is play. And that is important to me. Like, that's an important acknowledgement that reminds us that this is all play. And that's, I think that makes it kind of a special gag. Well placed.
Well, yeah, and just a note, Tony's nickname tracker, number 4, Shakespeare in the Park, which you've just brought up. So he just keeps them coming. I don't know if I like this one very much. One, because he wasn't involved at all in the conversation, so it becomes incredibly meta just to have him doing that.
Yeah,
and it really ends up becoming more directorial to put this in here as almost a nod to Brana rather than anything, because they're not dressed Shakespearean either. And that's the thing that kind of is like, there's nothing about him. And then he goes and like making fun of his mother's robes or drapes and all that. I'm like, yeah, but there's nothing, like if I saw him looking this way, I would not jump to Shakespeare. I guess I might jump to, I don't know, Roman soldier or something as opposed to Shakespeare, and especially Loki. And it's an interesting line because I'm like, is he referring to Loki or Thor or Loki and Thor? Because Loki certainly doesn't strike me as a kind of a Shakespearean look. So I don't know. I guess it just ends up feeling very meta as opposed to
and
something that fits into the scene.
I see that as Robert Downey Jr. and less Tig Notaro. Like I see that if you look at all these movies, I feel like he has the most consistent voice, and it's probably because it's stuff that Robert Downey Jr. is making up.
Is quipping.
Well, and we think think about what we know that Tony knows about Thor. Like they've never met up to this point of the movie. All he knows about Thor is what he's seen on his fancy flat screen see-through panel computers in the pre-work that he was given, right? Like, so I'm assuming that he's making some snap assumptions and coming up with quips based on, just the stuff that he was given in homework.
But wouldn't the quips be Nordic in reference
I agree with
to
you.
Shakespearean? This nickname really ends up driving me nuts because it's so meta. In no way it relates to Tony or the situation.
And there's another problem with it, Andy, that I think we have to acknowledge is that there is some world in which Tony, Iron Man flying around might have some ability to hear this conversation in the forest, but it took him kind of a long time to get there. We didn't see him in proximity. We have no indication that he was spying on them. They're just talking. And now, he finds them and suddenly knows what they're talking about. I acknowledge all that. You're right. And I still have fun with it. That's why I feel like a dirty person.
I was just going to say, do you think he could hear them? At least as he was getting closer. I mean, he's Iron Man. He can spy, so he could have been bloop, bloop, bloop. Jarvis was listening to them as he's flying.
And in defense, they are speaking with a royal Shakespearean accent.
They're so loud.
He heard.
As opposed to Nordic.
Their diction is so good.
The only line he heard was that, "You'll take my world as recompense for your imagined life."
There you go, brother. That's all I needed.
Into the abyss. I saw the abyss and you threw me into it. No. How much of a bifrosted father burn? It's
the throne will suit you ill, brother.
That's what he heard. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. No, truly, if he was listening in, he would have been rolling his eyes because I know I was. So, it's. I mean, I guess to your point, I do definitely. I can see that aspect of it. I guess, and maybe this is just a thing that with time, like I think I enjoyed this a lot more when I first saw the film. And I think over the years since I have, time has passed, I've revisited it, I find myself drawn to it less and less. And it's moments like this that I'm like, ugh, yeah, okay, we got to get through this whole thing. And I end up struggling with these more. And that to me, for me, I just end up wanting to get past this because I just find that it just feels so, in the end, it feels unnecessary for us to do. But I mean, I guess we'll explore it as we kind of go through it, but maybe it becomes necessary to actually have this so they can figure out how to work together as a team. And that's kind of the point of the film.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, all right. So Shakespeare in the Park, we get that. We get this whole kind of gag and everything. Just an aside to effects, when Tony opens his mask and we see his face as he's kind of having this conversation, at this point, this is 2012 when the film was made. We're talking about this in 2023. How do the effects look as far as Tony's face showing up like that? Does it look like effects, or does it look like he's in a suit and it's opening up?
So I think this is practical because of the blue light that's coming from his mask. That they probably did some sort of transition just so they can get that realistic illumination. Like, the toughest thing in the world is to do, at least back then and to a bit now, is are CGI shadows. It's so hard to get it right.
Yeah.
And there was probably some sort of handoff between, like, the actual digital, like, it was probably up and then they digitally put it down and then put it back up there. But my guess is, as he's talking to him, there's actually something above his head that's creating that light, that blue light that's coming down on his face.
See what I mean about the smart filmmaker stuff?
But yeah, it's something that I feel like it's like so out of control with, like, the new Ant-Man movie, which is constantly, every time they have to say a word, the mask comes off.
Yeah.
And then they do something again, the mask goes down. They say something, they do another quip, the mask comes up. Like, it's a little too much for me.
It's like they got to a point in superhero films. I feel like it all started in, like, I don't know, I would say Batman Returns, when they finally realized, or Michael Keaton might have realized, can I actually say this without my mask on? Because I feel like I can act better if I don't have to put a mask on. So they said, yeah, why don't you just rip it off? Just rip that mask right off, and you can do the rest of the movie without your mask. And eventually Spider-Man is doing that.
Spider-Man
here we get to this point where they're like, you know what? Once we get nano, these masks can come on and off, and then the actors can actually emote, and they won't have to worry about that,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very rare when you get, like, Dread, where the mask is always on, or The Mandalorian, where it's always on. Those are the rare moments where an actor is like, yeah, no, I'm fine. Just keep the mask on me.
Keep it on.
I think I don't know that I entirely agree about it looking practical. I think the close-ups look really good, but for some reason, right around second 28, it looks like a face floating kind of in a forest with, and then in proximity, there's a helmet around it. I find that shot particularly distracting. It is like his face is so well lit that I don't believe, like he's probably wearing, I think you're exactly right, Nathan. He's probably wearing some sort of green lighting effect to light his face properly. But I think the rest of the suit is all CG at this point.
Yeah, I think the CG is fake. He's probably wearing, like, some leotard, like a gray leotard or something like that, with, like, a practical light fixture thing above his head.
Right.
Yeah. I think my issue with it is that his face seems ever so slightly larger than it should be to fit into the helmet as it is. And so I think that's where I end up, like, if that's his face inside that helmet, his ears are, like, mashed into the side of his head, it's just not allowing for any additional space in there. And so I think that's where I end up kind of struggling. Like, it's just slightly off as far as the size.
Yeah.
Okay, so we get to this point where it really turns into the fight between these two. Thor and Tony exchange some lines. Don't take my stuff. You don't know what you're dealing with. This is beyond you. He's going to face Asgardian justice. This is that line where he says, hey, if he gives up the cube, he's all yours. Until then, stay out of the way. And then the fighting commences, and it all starts. Iron Man throws one last line out. He calls him a tourist, and, which I think is an interesting line to throw out to somebody who just flew and landed on top of your jet, and then grabbed somebody and flew out of it, and then and also hit you in the chest with his hammer and knocked you down. I don't know. That to me is probably the line I do like the most from Iron Man, because that to me does feel more like Tony, like, what's the expression, like your feather, like the peacocking? Is that
Yeah, that was definitely meant to be shade that he's throwing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's kind of weird shade because we're no longer looking at Iron Man when he says it. Like, it's one of those things that just reads like weird ADR. Like, why did they not stay on Iron Man? He's just in a helmet. Like, you don't even need to see his mouth move. Just show us the character saying it.
It's probably, if it was added later, like its absence, you just need one more thing to tick Thor off.
Yep.
Like, you don't want him to boil, think for a moment, and then like shoot the guy in the back. Then it makes Thor seem a little lame. Like, he needs one more thing to go off, and then he snaps. For it to be rushed rather than to have that moment to think.
And your point is interesting. Does Tony? I guess Tony must hear the hammer coming toward him or something, because he throws the hammer as Tony's walking away, but Tony turns in time for it to nail him directly in the chest. And it does make me wonder if, like, Jarvis had warned him of something coming, or if he had actually heard it, or I don't know. I mean, why does he turn there as opposed to getting hit in the back?
My assumption would be that Jarvis was like, beep, beep, there's something coming,
Proximity alert, hammer nearby.
Hammer inbound. Yeah, right.
I like that in the hit, you really feel the strength of the hammer, right? And the like kablooiness of it.
Absolutely.
When it hits him a couple times.
Well, yeah, it takes him right through a tree, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
This is interesting because this comes up later, but like, so they have their own movies. You get the sense that each character is awesome, but this is the first time that you have to kind of adjust the power levels of each hero when they have to actually fight each other. Like, how powerful is Iron Man versus Thor? Like, is Thor really powerful and Iron Man is like half as powerful? Like, this is the very first time we've actually had to have the other heroes meet and to kind of square off against each other and to then recalibrate like their power levels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And to try getting a sense to your something that one of you said the other day, since they're technically not fighting villains at this point, are they kind of pulling their punches a little bit just to kind of as a way to just test each other out,
Yeah, I think that's the case for sure.
I agree.
Although when Thor tosses the hammer, he does look like he's really tossing the hammer. It doesn't look too half-assed.
It does go back to like what, again, that first hit, how much damage should that do to Tony? And we definitely get, they cheat a lot in regard to Iron Man in particular by glitching the helmet display. So that they don't necessarily have to demonstrate actual physical damage to the armor. And I think that gives a lot of leeway because it communicates when you're watching the movie in the sequence in order, not stopping and watching 60 seconds at a time. You actually don't stop and think about the fact that hammer should have crushed his chest, right? Like, that's our expression of the hammer. And it does not. But we do get the reset and Jarvis glitching and the graphics glitching. And that is, presumptively enough.
Yeah, and that's a good point because it's something that we'll certainly see over the course of the film and the franchise. When Iron Man is getting hit by anything, oftentimes the suit isn't taking too much of a brunt of it. It's like a spaceship in a movie. You don't have to show a bunch of damage as long as they have their force fields up, and even if their force fields are dwindling, it's still only at
sparks on the bridge,
17%, right? And that's essentially his HUD is the sparks on the bridge that we're getting right here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, Yeah, I can kind of buy into that as far as the way that they're playing it. As far as like we can just show the HUD damage and everything, and then we'll go from there.
It's like two people just shoving each other in a parking lot, and they're not punching yet. They're just shoving.
The superhero shove.
He's like, Jarvis, set my blasters to shove. Set the hammer to shove.
Right,
not
exactly.
punch.
I do enjoy I enjoy, yet also I kind of laugh at the how fake it looks when we cut to Loki sitting on the cliffside, just kind of sitting in to watch all of this. It's, I mean, more than ever, this cliffside ends up looking so staged. It doesn't, nothing about it ends up reeking any verisimilitude by this point. You know, it's just like, movie set, pretty much a movie set.
Yeah.
But it's so dark. Like, they get away with a lot because it's really dark. And so, you know, okay, maybe.
Yeah. All right. At the very end of the minute, we see Thor swinging his hammer around to take one more hit at Tony. And of course, Tony, as he's kind of getting himself up off the ground, he raises a hand and hits Thor right in the chest, blasting Thor back. And now it's on. This is the start of what's going to be a big, big fight.
And there's no question that Tony's weapons would do no damage to Thor or his magical fabric, right? Like, we never stop and question that.
No.
Well, Thor doesn't get the magical, Emperor's New Clothes that Loki does.
No, he doesn't. But you have to imagine there's some sort of magic in the Asgardian fabric, because otherwise...
The metal's got to be all made out of, like, stars and stuff, just like Mjolnir is.
Stars!
Right?
Well, and as we see at the end of Thor, like, his father rebuilds his entire outfit out of magic as he kind of gives him, or he gives him his powers back, right? When Thor has proven himself worthy, and he gets Mjolnir, and all of his stuff magically reappears on him. So I don't know. I'd like to think that there's a hint of Odin magic, and maybe it's all father magic that is just like, you know what? Let's make sure Thor doesn't end up running around naked yet either.
You know what would be really funny, though, is if Odin could, to Krissy's point, reprogram all the armor of Thor, and like one day Thor doesn't have enough honor and can't get out of bed because he's wearing his armor, and he can no longer sit up. I think that would be really funny.
His armor is basically as strong as Mjolnir.
Yeah, exactly. His armor is Mjolnir. I think that would be amazing.
Oh, so funny. And we know, I mean, we'd already seen that, Iron Man can hold his own against Asgardians. We saw him blast Loki a few minutes, back in Stuttgart.
Right.
So, and so he gets to that, and he knows that he can hold his own against Thor at this point.
Yeah.
So, well, Nathan and Krissy, we're coming to the end of our conversations. Any last thoughts about this movie, the Avengers films, anything that you want to say about any of this?
Boy, I hope they find that Tesseract.
Krissy?
I really like the Avengers, like, in spite of all of the, looking back on it now and seeing the little spots of trouble here and there. I think this is where the MCU really sort of said, hey, we're not going to take ourselves too seriously. We can do, a big everybody gets together movie and still have fun and laugh and have a good silly time, as well as with all the serious stuff. So I think this was a great milestone movie in that way.
So Krissy and I have sort of built a podcasting career on revisiting movies that are actually problematic. And I think this one turns out pretty okay, despite Mr. Whedon, a.k.a. Tig Notaro's involvement. I feel like there's so much energy of what Marvel wanted to make this movie be, and just all the characters, that there's very little of that kind of permeating the rewatch. And so, I think this was a great, important movie, and I remember it being a lot of fun, and I feel like it holds up pretty darn well.
How would you two rank the 4 Avengers films?
Ooh. Goodness gracious. Well, Endgame's got to be. It's hard because I think Endgame's got to be number 1.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like, does Avengers have to be number 1? Because that's where it all starts.
It's tough. Like I find the first Infinity War one to be more rewatchable because Endgame is also it's also conclusion-y, you know, and so I find Infinity War to be the most watchable because you get the excitement of everyone coming together and the stakes being so high and things like that. But I would definitely put Ultron at the bottom.
Yeah, I was going to say the important thing is that
let's
Ultron
agree on
is
one
not
thing,
ranking.
right? Let's agree on one thing. Yeah.
Although James Spader in our world, James Spader being a part of anything makes it magic in the 80s. So James Spader notwithstanding, there's no Ultron registering. Although, like, I think that the moment of Endgame, the reason I would put it first is because that moment where Cap picks up the hammer is just chill. Just describing it gives me chills, like whole body chills. It was such an amazing moment. That's why that one will always be number 1 for me, because that was just movie magic.
Yeah.
But it all built from here. It built from, and they built on that in Ultron too, where he's like joking about like if you put the hammer in an elevator, can it go up? Who can hold the elevator, or who can hold the hammer, and would Cap ever be able to wield it? So you can't discount it completely. Only almost completely.
Only almost.
Only almost. Well, it has been so much fun talking with the two of you. Thank you both so much for joining us for these 5 minutes. We certainly appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. We have so much fun talking minutes with you guys.
Well, we appreciate it. Tell everybody one last time what about your show and where they can track it down.
Yeah, so we host the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast, and it's really about revisiting the movies that we grew up on. In this case, the 80s, but seeing them with our adult eyes and seeing if they hold up, and then also revisiting movies that we may have missed as well.
Awesome. Lots of good episodes in there, everybody. Check those out. We'll have the link in the show notes, so you can just hop in there and you can get more other links to Nathan and Krissy, see what they're up to. And if you're not seeing the show notes in your podcatcher, just go to our website, marvelmovieminute.com, and you can check it out there, get all the show notes and links. And you can also learn about our membership, get early access to all your shows, get episodes ad-free, bonus episodes, all that good stuff. marvelmovieminute.com. That's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with another guest. So, Pete, thanks as always.
Tomorrow, the God of Thunder comes unleashed.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of TruStory FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is Message to the World by Anthony Vega, and this season's show art is by Winston Yabo. Find the show at trustory.fm. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.